I'm Marianne Lippa. I'm one of the advisors on the graduate student and postdoc team in the Career Services Office at Penn. Today we're going to talk about what are some of the strategies that you may utilize as an international student as you go about your job search. So in today's workshop, we're going to focus on kind of the overview of what to expect as an international student going through the job search. We will quickly touch upon resumes and cover letters. In addition, we will discuss what networking is and informational interviews. We'll also briefly talk about interviewing strategies. And then lastly, what are some of the additional resources that you can access as an international student while you are conducting your job search? In general, the US immigration laws do permit international students to be employed in the US during and directly after your academic program. So I think that that's really important to remember, that you do have that option of certainly staying in the US to then begin a full-time position that's directly related to your academic program of study. You may have heard about what practical training is, and what that means is that if you are on an F1 visa as a student, practical training allows you to work up to 12 months in that field related to your studies. Now, one of the caveats about this is that the laws are constantly changing, so we do encourage you to stay up to date on what those changes or updates may be. If you haven't already connected with your advisor in ISSS, which is the International Student and Scholar Services Office, we do recommend that you do connect with them just to clarify any concerns or any questions that you may have as it relates to your visa status. Equally important to keep in mind is that if you do have the goal of working in the United States following graduation, you really do need to plan ahead, right? This is not something that you can decide a week or two before your program ends. This is something that you need to be very proactive about and plan ahead so that you're able to get necessary paperwork completed, approved, and just making sure that all of that is in a row and ready to go. As part of the overview of understanding as an international student what some of the challenges may be is that, by not being a US citizen or a permanent resident, it may add a bit more level of complexity and difficulty to your job search, namely because for some employers, it can add a level of expense if they were to hire you. But the good news is that there are employers who are willing to hire international students. Certainly this depends on the industry, it depends on the employer, how large of a company it is in terms of resources, what their need would be for workers, and also, what are the relationships that they have with international clients. So certainly if it's a multinational company, all of those factors are at play when it comes to figuring out which employers are able to hire international students. Now, as a foreign national, there are some exceptions to this, but in general, you would not be eligible to work for the US federal government. So just keeping that in mind, that is one area where it is going to be a much more limited access. You may ask yourself, well, why would a US employer hire me? Why would they want to invest in me as an employee? And so some of the things that I think are really important to remember in terms of what you bring as a candidate in the job search as an international student is that you may have, a higher level of qualification than perhaps what they have in their applicant pool with US permanent residents or citizens, right? So that certainly is a plus, that you may bring a higher level of qualification. Your experiences are certainly they may be different, they may be very useful, they may be very appropriate for that role. And so certainly that's another advantage that you may have. Your skill set and abilities and your experiences all really kind of come into play when it comes, as part of your application. So that's also important. Perhaps the role involves language skills and language competencies, while you may also have important language skills that are needed for that role. And lastly, you may have an understanding of how different countries and different cultures are, and that's certainly something that you can bring as an international student. The key to this, though, is understanding that within your skill set, you need to make sure that you can demonstrate what your qualifications, skills, and abilities are, and illustrate those to the employer through your application materials and interviews. So it's very important that you're able to clearly convey that and really help them understand what your skill set, what your qualifications are that you do bring. So to that end, we will quickly talk about resumes and cover letters as part of your application materials. So just some quick tips as it relates to your resume. A resume is typically the expectation for business and industry positions, whereas a CV is the expectation for academic positions. Many positions will require you to write a cover letter, so that is something that as part of your application materials, in addition to asking for a resume or CV, they will also ask you to submit a cover letter. You will also need to make sure that you have lined up and prepared to provide, you're prepared to provide 2 to 3 references for your application. So that's something where you want to make sure that you've at least asked those individuals that they would be willing to serve as a reference if you get to that point in the application process. And also keep in mind that some positions will also require writing samples. So that is something that you may be asked for as well. In terms of your application materials, you want to make sure that they are concise, that they're error-free, that they're grammatically correct. You want to make sure that you're articulating how this position is a good match between your skill set, between your background and the position, how you will be successful in this role. And also you want to make sure that you're able to demonstrate what the relevant skills are that you bring through examples, right? So it's really important to not just be talking about generalizations, but rather concrete specific examples and illustrating those skill sets through the examples themselves. Another important tip about the resume is that 1 page is the expectation in length. If, let's say, you're required to submit a CV for an academic position, or perhaps you have a scientific research-based role, it could be a little bit longer, but in terms of an actual resume for most positions, the 1 page is the expectation in length. You want to make sure that it's a very readable document so that you don't have a lot of graphics on it, you don't have multiple columns. You want to make sure that you're consistent with formatting, so consistent with font size, with font style. Another thing that I often will remind international students when we have an appointment is that in the United States, it is not expected to include a photo. There may be times where if, let's say, you're applying for a position back in, for a position abroad where that is the expectation for a resume, but here in the United States, you do not include a photo. And you also do not include personal information such as your birth date or your marital status. I think, as you start to prepare your application materials, it's important to understand what are some of the cultural differences that you would have in an application for a position in the US. And one of the things that I think is really important to remember is that you want to kind of sell or promote your skill set, right? And really talk about what you bring as a candidate, right? So as I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you're able to illustrate what those skills are through specific examples. So for example, on a resume, you want to make sure that you're using a good action verb. You want to make sure that you're providing details and context for the reader. So certainly quantifying is a great way to do that. And then you also wanted to talk about what the result, impact, or outcome would be. So here I've just selected 2 examples here. So, a student coordinated 3 conferences for 300 students, resulting in the highest attendance in the last 10 years. So as you can see, they're using a good action verb of coordinated. They're quantifying information in terms of the number of students who attended, what that impact or result was, which is that it was the highest in the past 10 years. The next example is that this particular student was teaching chemistry classes. So they quantified the number of classes that they taught to what the size of the class was and how they were able to teach that, right? So they were talking about the different resources. So again, you really want to make sure that it's a clear illustration and that it's also providing helpful, useful information. So now kind of shifting to the cover letters, cover letters are much more direct when you're applying for a position in the United States. 1 page is the expectation, no more than 1 page. And you want to be very direct at being able to connect your interest and skills to the position that you're applying for, right? So you don't necessarily need to be overly formal and polite, right? So sometimes, I will see drafts of cover letters where it says, it is my honor, or it is with a distinct privilege. And, you don't have to be that formal with it. You want to be much more direct. We do have samples on our website, and as part of the job search skills week, we will also have additional workshops on cover letters and resumes as well. So be sure to check those out. Real quickly about the cover letter, kind of the structure is you're conveying why you're interested, why you're qualified and prepared for the position. And then you talk about what the next steps would be. So certainly kind of wrapping up the letter. Again, those are kind of that's the quick outline. But if you're interested in learning more about the elements of the cover letter, I encourage you to check out the workshop this week. So now we're going to talk about networking, what networking is and what networking is not. Networking is a very effective part of your job search. It's a very effective tool and resource to use. And I think a lot of students aren't necessarily sure where to start with networking. They may not be clear what networking is, what it isn't. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of what it entails and then some resources for you. So networking is being able to talk with a clear goal in mind, right? So you are not only gathering information from the other person with whom you're speaking, but you're also going to be sharing information about yourself. So you're building a relationship, right? You're building a connection. Networking is also about researching the job, researching that career field, and it's helping you get a better sense of what it is to be in that particular type of industry, that particular type of role. So we like to talk about how it's like 50% information gathering and 50% information sharing, right? So it's kind of that mutual discussion back and forth. It is something that is not quickly done. It does take some time on your part to really dedicate to this process. And it's an ongoing process, right? So it's not something that just has a finite ending. It's going to be something that's continuous and never finished. I do think that with each conversation that you have, it's something that you will be more comfortable with and certainly be able to more effectively conduct as you go through the process of networking. Now, on the flip side, what networking is not, and I think it's really important to remember what some of the misconceptions are about networking, it is not asking for a job referral. It is also not asking for a job opportunity, right? So that is very important to remember. Networking is intended to build a relationship, to gather information and share information about yourself. It's also, as I mentioned, not something with a finite ending. It's not necessarily where you just do it once and then that's it, right? And that there's no follow-up or there's no kind of continuation of it. So keeping in mind what networking is and what it is not is really key as you utilize this as part of your job search process. Part of networking is going to require you to have what we call informational interviews. So informational interviews are where you're gathering information, you're learning more about a particular career field, perhaps the individual's career path with whom you're speaking. It's a one-on-one conversation where you're able to ask questions and really just learn as much as you can about that career field, about that career path that they have, and perhaps maybe some positions that you might be interested in. They may have some insight into what those types of roles entail or what they would be. It also enables you during the informational interview to really develop that professional relationship and that professional connection, right, with people that are in the field that you're interested in pursuing. So it allows you to have that opportunity to start to speak with individuals and also for you to then be able to follow up with them, certainly as you go through the process. So one of the guides that I think is going to be really useful for you as part of this, understanding what networking is and how it can be incorporated into your job search is our informational interviewing guide. Joseph, if you don't mind just putting the link in the chat, that would be great. This is a very comprehensive guide where we give you kind of a sample email on how to introduce yourself. What are some of the questions that you may want to ask when you actually are speaking with the individual that you have set up an informational interview with. We also have kind of a sample spreadsheet on how to keep track of your notes, because as you start to have more than one conversation, some of the details can blend together. So it's important to kind of keep all of your notes organized. So now thinking about interviewing and how that may or may not differ from interviewing in your home country, an interview is your opportunity to really be able to effectively speak about how you are qualified and how your skills are relevant to the employer and the position, right? Certainly right now with the pandemic, there's going to be more video interviews and remote interviews as opposed to in person, but at some point in-person interviews will resume. And so, certainly being able to kind of adapt to both types of settings and platforms is going to be important. In an interview, certainly eye contact is really important. Having good posture, whether you're on a video platform or in person, making sure you have good posture as you sit. Being able to talk about yourself, being able to just, have a lot of positive nonverbal body language is going to be important as well. You also want to remember that this is a positive experience, right? So they want to learn, they're interested in learning more about you. And so you're then interested in sharing more about yourself. So you always want to make sure that you're optimistic, you're showing your enthusiasm, you're personable, you're outgoing, and of course, you're always honest, and making sure that you can talk confidently, but you also want to make sure that it's not coming across as being too arrogant, right? And so you don't want to be too kind of overly promoting yourself, right? It's a fine line, but it is important to talk about yourself confidently, and being comfortable in that. And if you have not yet had a lot of experience interviewing, or even if you have had experience interviewing, certainly, you can schedule a mock interview with a career advisor. We have various workshops on interviewing, including one this week, as part of our job search series week. So be sure to check that out as well. So in terms of interviewing, the most common type of interview that you will encounter is what's called a behavioral-based interview. You might be wondering, what does that mean by behavioral based? And so behavioral interviewing is a specific type of interviewing that interviewers from employers like to use because they're evaluating your past behavior in order to predict your future behavior in a particular situation. So it's, certainly being able to identify the questions as, tell me about a time, right? Or describe an experience when or in which. Give an example when. Walk me through the steps you have taken when. And those are the kind of identifying elements of a behavioral-based question. So in terms of how do you answer those behavioral-based questions, you want to make sure that you have concrete examples that are verifiable and that they describe how you've dealt with issues and situations in the past. You want to make sure that they are not general, that they are specific examples, right? You're giving good details about it, and you want to make sure that the skills and experiences are relevant to the position. So it's going to be really important for you to pay close attention to the job posting to make sure that the skills and experiences you're highlighting are relevant to the role that you've applied for. So one of the ways that you're able to help structure your answer is using what we call the STAR method. So thinking about the STAR. S stands for situation, T stands for task, A for action, and R for results. So with a situation, you're trying to explain to the employer, what was the scenario, what was the experience, thinking about where it occurred, what you were doing, and of course, you want to make sure that this has a positive outcome in terms of which example to select. The task is what were you asked to do, or what were the tasks or challenges that you were involved in that you had to overcome. The action is describing specifically what actions you took in order to complete and achieve your results. And then lastly, the results are, what are the positive results and outcomes that followed as a result of your actions? So certainly, the STAR method is something that can help structure your answer. It's something that when we give mock interviews, we always remind students to make sure that they are employing this particular strategy and method to structure behavioral-based question. So some additional resources that I'd like to go over with you as it relates to your job search include two external websites that I think are very useful for you as you go about your job search. The first is called Going Global. Going Global is a great resource and platform for students who are interested in understanding what are the different opportunities that exist here, as well as, perhaps in the UniWorld, if you're interested in working for a multinational company, you would then be able to look up what company may have an office in your home country, for example. Now, with Going Global, one of the great resources that is offered is you're able to look to see who has hired international students. And so that would be through what they call the H-1B plus database. So as you can see from the screenshot, you can look by occupation, you can search by company, you can search by geographic area, and then that gives you some results that you're then able to look for. So this is something that I think, if you're in the position where you are thinking ahead and you would like to have a company potentially sponsor you for an H-1B, certainly this is a great database that you're able to utilize. As you can see at the top, there's an entire section on H-1B visas. So there's certainly a very comprehensive list for that. There are some upcoming webinars that I would encourage you to check out if you can. Some of them are going to be in March and some are in April. So if you go to Going Global through the Career Services link, you authenticate with your PEN key and you're able to access Going Global because we pay for the subscription. You will then see what the upcoming live webinars are that they are offering to students. And as I mentioned earlier, UniWorld is a great database to find companies that may be headquartered in certain countries, or they may have offices and locations in certain countries that are of interest to you. And you can also access UniWorld through the Career Services online subscription page, or when you're on the Career Services website, you can just type in the search box UniWorld or Going Global, and you can access it that way from our website.